Hi, everybody. I'm Scott LaGreca, and I will be talking to you today about Bermuda's lichens. The title of our talk is Bermuda's Lichens, Species Diversity and Conservation in a Remote North Atlantic Archipelago. This is the work of me and my co-author, Franz Berger, pictured here. Now, where exactly is Bermuda? Turns out a lot of people don't really know. A lot of people assume it's in the Caribbean. Well, here's a map showing you exactly where Bermuda is. It's that blue star in the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean, and that's the Southeast United States. And to the left is the Southeast United States, and Greater Antilles is shown below. So Bermuda's not in the Caribbean. It's actually not even one island. It's an archipelago of 170 islands, of which there are like 5 to 7 main islands. Now, as you can see here, Bermuda is one of the most isolated archipelagos in the world. The closest landmass is North Carolina, where I actually happen to be speaking to you from now, but I'm still 1,326 kilometers away. And Bermuda is actually the British overseas territory. In fact, it's the oldest UK overseas territory, established over 400 years ago, and it's very densely populated. But as you can see, it's very far from the UK. It's 5,500 kilometers away. It's about 1,600 kilometers from Miami and about 1,500 kilometers from San Juan. And it's Miami and Bermuda and San Juan together that form the 3 points of the infamous Bermuda Triangle, where dozens of ships and airplanes have supposedly disappeared. Dun, dun, dun. And sadly, that's what most people know about Bermuda. That's kind of it. But in reality, it's a really lovely place with pink sand surrounded by crystal clear blue waters, and it's shaped roughly like a fishhook. Now, here's a close-up map of Bermuda. Geologically, the Bermuda Islands are made of limestone derived from coral reefs that grew on top of the remains of volcanic mountains that once rose thousands of feet into the air. The islands have sunk completely underwater at different times, and the islands that exist today currently are only about 900,000 years old, so less than 1 million years old. Now, if you look carefully at this map, you can actually see the ancient calderas, the remnants of the extinct volcanoes, Great Sound, Harrington Sound, Castle Harbor. Now, I want to give you a very brief history of lichenology in Bermuda. The first natural history survey of Bermuda was done in 1873 by Henry Moseley, who was the naturalist on board the Challenger expedition from the UK. He collected all manner of organisms, including 40 specimens of lichens. Next, just 7 years later, in 1880, William Farlow from Harvard University visited Bermuda and made a small but important collection of lichens that were studied by the premier North American lichenologist, Edward Tuckerman. Next, it was the majority of historical lichen collections were made by Elizabeth Gertrude Knight Britton. She was a botanist from the New York Botanical Garden and wife of Nathaniel Lord Britton, who wrote the book, The Flora of Bermuda. And they spent many months together in Bermuda with colleagues where Elizabeth was in charge of collecting cryptogams, mainly bryophytes and lichens. And those collections are in New York. And finally, we've got Lincoln Ware Riddle. Riddle never actually visited Bermuda. What he did instead, which was equally important, was summarize all the lichen specimens in literature. And in 1916, he published a definitive list of 91 taxa from Bermuda. However, Riddle did not borrow the original Challenger specimens from the Natural History Museum, and he only worked from from literature reports of those specimens. So nobody had reviewed those original collections until I arrived in London in 2004 and was curator of lichens for a number of years at the Natural History Museum. And I want to point out, actually, the beauty of studying the lichens of a place like Bermuda is that there are a finite and manageable number of historic lichen collections. So in the 15 years I've been working on this project, I've examined just about all of them. And re-examination and review of historic specimens is absolutely critical for understanding the flora of an area. You can't just travel there and collect, you also have to examine the old material. And I was fortunate to work at both the Natural History Museum in London and at Harvard, where all of these historic specimens are located. In fact, there's duplicates of Elizabeth Britton's collections at the Farlow as well. Now, here's some of the things that you can learn from these historic specimens. Some species described from Bermuda are known only from the type material. They're synonyms of other taxa. For example, these four, but like, for example, the third one down in the list, Lichenicolous calignosa, is known only from the type collection from Bermuda, but it's actually, when you examine it, it's Malmidia venosa, which was described before and is a widespread tropical species. Now, some species, by reviewing specimens, you can just cross off your list completely. For example, Phaeophysia liana is a lichen that is endemic to North America from river corridors. And I had to borrow this specimen from the Nylander Herbarium, who also looked at the Bermuda material, the original Bermuda material, and just realized it's a scrap of some folios physioid lichen. In fact, I think I sent it to Roland Moberg, who confirmed this. So it's indeterminable, but it's not Phaeophysia liana, so we could scratch that name off the list. And Cladonia rangiformis was a specimen from the Challenger expedition that Ati looked at and determined that it is actually that species, but he was able to, he said it's so far out of range of that species and the habitat's all wrong that the specimen, he discounted it as being mislabeled. So we crossed that species off the list. And then finally, you can, in addition to reviewing specimens, you can review literature reports. And based on just looking through the Henson Herbarium, because it said at Helsinki now, the curators told me there is no specimen of Placenthium stenophyllum. And I've looked through the entire Howe Herbarium at Harvard and have found no specimens of Telichthys from Bermuda there. So those could be taken off the official species list as well. And here's a photograph of that questionable Cladonia rangiformis specimen, which Ati annotated like this. He wrote, locality Bermuda, highly doubtful, mislabeled by J.M. Crombie, question mark. Now, with regards to synonymy, you can also have the reverse happen, meaning in some cases, Bermuda species descriptions have been overlooked by different workers. In the case on the left here, you have Bacidina varia, which was described from Florida. And it's actually a synonym of a Bermuda lichen, which was named by Riddle in honor of Elizabeth Britton, Bilymbia brittoniana. Now we call it Bacidina brittoniana. In the case on the right, you have Lechinor preferenda, described from I don't know where, but it's actually a synonym of Lechinor bermudensis. Okay, now on to the fieldwork component, which we all know is a lot more fun than herbarium work. Between my co-author and myself, we visited Bermuda 4 times total and collected hundreds of specimens. And despite the huge amount of human development, there are actually some interesting and diverse lichen habitats. For example, cultivated yards and tree-filled spaces, as in the upper left, introduce different rock types and also different tree species horticulturally with new lichens. There's a dead Bermuda cedar tree featured in that photo, and I just wanted to tell you that it's one of Bermuda's endemic tree species, and it was pretty much wiped out because of an introduced scale insect, and so probably some endemic lichens went with it. Who knows? Anyway, moving on, probably the most famous natural area in Bermuda is Walsingham Jungle in the lower left, with lots of rare species of different kinds of organisms, including lichens. In the upper right here, we have Paget Marsh, which is an important conserved freshwater marsh. There's very few freshwater habitats in Bermuda, as you might imagine. On the lower right, you've got Blue Hole Cave. Bermuda actually is riddled with an extensive cave system because of the limestone, and most of them are submerged underwater. But anyway, this locality is where we found the first records of foliicolous lichens growing on Bermuda palmetto fronds. And Bermuda palmetto is another one of Bermuda's endemic tree species. And lastly, in the middle, we have the rocky shore environment. And these are not rich in lichens. As we know, like relatively few lichens grow in limestone compared to granite anyway. And the limestone in these habitats is a lot of times unstable. So you have like cyanobacteria, but very few lichens. So how many lichens are on Bermuda? Well, 91 were originally recorded. And as you can see here, we have bumped that, we've more than doubled that to 209 based on both historic and recent collections. And here I've tried to put this in context of other islands, comparing Bermuda with other Atlantic islands and also the Caribbean islands. And these islands are roughly ordered by area, square kilometers. And there's a rough correlation between the area and number of species, especially in the Caribbean. Of course, we know that species diversity is not just a function of size of the island, but also a function of habitat diversity, latitude, climate, proximity to other land masses, and so on. So take from this what you will. And I've crunched some numbers and have some other basic facts about Bermuda's lichen flora. The species found there, just like the vascular plants, actually fall under 4 floristic elements. Southeastern United States, Caribbean. Some species are found in both Southeastern US and the Caribbean. And then a number of species are pantropical, probably some of which were introduced through horticultural trees. The overwhelming majority of Bermuda's lichens are crustose. And about half of Bermuda's lichens reproduce only by ascospores, or mainly by ascospores, that is, they're paratheciate or apotheciate. And finally, the question that everyone wants to know is how many endemic lichen species are there in Bermuda? Well, there are about 11 species by my calculations, which is about a 5% endemism rate, which is pretty low, but that's typical of Bermuda for different reasons I won't get into here. But Riddle reported more endemics, but as we talked about, some of those have either been synonymized or found elsewhere on the planet. Now, the truth is, geographic ranges of cryptogams are still so poorly known. There are cryptic species as well. So we really don't know unless we look at molecular data. That is, we don't know if something's endemic or not. Finally, we also know from looking at historic specimens that at least 7 species of lichens have been extirpated from Bermuda. And this includes 4 species of Cladonia, which are only known from historic collections. They were mostly from dunes, but dunes as a habitat are basically gone from Bermuda because of human development. So I've looked and I've not found a single Cladonia during my field work. Now, during our work, Franz Berger and I have found 7 species of lichens new to science so far. 4 of these are pictured here. They've been formally described, and the other 3 are listed down below, and they're in the works. And the question always is, like, are these new species endemic to Bermuda? Well, we know that the 2 on the left are not. They've been found elsewhere. The 2 on the right are known just from the type collection from Bermuda. So who knows? You can't assume anything. So what are the next steps? Well, the next step in my work on Bermuda lichens is to begin to assess endemism. And this table shows the 11 putative Bermuda lichen species. And I've sent materials, some of these, to different experts around the world. Damien Ertz, who's an expert in Roxalaceae, got some Angiactis bermudensis, he's having trouble with the DNA extraction. Kalima thamnodes is an interesting case. I sent it to Matthias Schultz and Maria Prieto, who we all suspected it was actually a species of lichenales, and actually it does turn out to be a species of lichenales. It's not a Kalima at all. It groups with some other similar lichens from Guadeloupe. Anyway, the two highlighted in yellow are species that I've received a grant from the Bermuda Zoological Society to do some molecular work on. And I'm planning to use some of this money to reconstruct a phylogeny of the genus Diploicia, pictured here on the left, as part of describing this new species. And there's also money to work on Stromatella, which is an interesting monotypic genus of lichenicolous described from Bermuda. And also it's been reported from the US recently. So I made collections from both places. Matthias Schultz and I have been trying to sequence them. We're having some problems, but we'll get there. And the grant I have is also funding work on this. It's a planned phylogeographic study of Ramulana denticulata. And as with other Bermuda lichens, the species also occurs in the Southeast US and the Caribbean. And the question is, where did it arrive from? Did it arrive from the Southeast United States, or did it arrive from the Caribbean? So I'll be looking at different markers and haplotype networks to try and answer this question. Anyway, if you're listening out there, I welcome any fresh collections of Ramulana denticulata or complanata from the Southeastern US or the Caribbean, especially the Caribbean, so please send me material. And wrapping up, I just want to invite you all to visit my Bermuda Lichens website. The URL is shown here. It's a work in progress. And I would like to thank the following organizations and people, especially Natural History Museum and Bermuda Aquarium Museum and Zoo for funding. And I want to thank you all for listening. Thank you.